A few days ago, I have uploaded a new jam to my channel of a Goa trance track, and someone in the comments asked if I can create a tutorial for it. To which I replied that if a few people will be interested, I will create it. So Nicholas, a promise is a promise. Okay, so in today's tutorial, I will try to explain to you how I created this track that I have uploaded to my channel a few days ago. I will try to do some reverse engineer and have a breakdown of all the different parts that I used, how I came up with them, the inspiration, how I've developed the track, and how I planned the jam with the different sections and prepare it to play it live. So there is some challenge for me to fully explain how I created this track, because when I'm creating a track, I'm not always cautious or aware of some of the decisions that I make. I let my self-expression guide me more than my rational thought. And this ability to express myself comes from practicing and learning a lot in different sessions, which I try to make almost daily. Sessions that you are not seeing, I'm not uploading those because most of them are shitty and not worth sharing. But I want you to understand that if you want to get better, if you want to learn to compose more complete and interesting track on the Electribe, you have to practice. And this is true for anything that you want to do. When we see the end result, when we see someone play or do something nicely that we feel we're not capable of doing, we're thinking that this comes for them natural, but this is not true. It requires a lot of practice, it's require some patience and the willing to learn. Now, I want to talk a bit about the inspiration for this specific track. I was inspired by the idea to make this track after listening recently to a lot of Goa trance from the early 90s era, which until today really excite me and I'm a big fan of. And what I had in mind is that I wanted to pick up a very simple oscillator like the sine oscillator and compose this melody that will be the bass and the theme for the whole track. And this is something that I feel was very common back then. And you could hear it with plenty of typical Goa trance from the 90s. So I started by picking this pad over here. And the reason I picked this one is because I will reserve all these pads over here for the drums. And the first two I will usually use for some bassline. This allows me to be more consistent with my track and just remember where each part is. So when I need to perform them live and unmute the tracks, I can remember where they are. So I picked this pad. I changed the tempo to be 142, which is also typical to some of the Goa trance from the early 90s. I changed the master effect to be high pass delay. And for the actual oscillator over here, you can see that it's the simple oscillator, the sine oscillator. And if you want to copy some of the setting, they're really not much, but I can show you. So the pitch is on 0. There is no glide. I changed the oscillator edit a bit just to give it more brightness. Because if I use the original settings, you can hear that it's quite mute, right? But if I change it a bit, it's open the sound. The filter is the Electribe low pass filter. And you can see it's fully open. I didn't use the filter on this sound. And the filter envelope is also on 0 because I'm not using it here. Now, the modulation, I'm using the LFO triangle, and what I'm modulating is the oscillator edit, just to give it more movement and make it more interesting, right? So the mode depth is 28, and the mode speed is 42, which are these settings. Level is 100, pan is center. Okay, so for the envelope, I changed that from a sustained sound, this is the default, to be with decay and release. Just so I can play the melody and it will give it more rhythm. There are no effects, as you can see. And I changed it to be monophonic, just so I can save on the polyphony. And that is basically it for the main sound. That is the bass for the theme of the track. Now, for the actual melody and pattern that I came up with, I changed the scale to be Phrygian and changed the root note to be F sharp, right? So if I change that to keyboard, this one is F sharp now. And now the whole scale is in the scale of F sharp, Phrygian, which sound like this. And you can also hear that I'm activating the master effect on this sound. Okay, so the melody is very simple. It's just one bar that repeats itself and goes like this. That's all. And I recorded this, and this is how I started the track. Now, once I had this melody going on, I wanted to add a bass line, and I wanted to add a rolling bass line, which I decided to put on this channel over here. And for that, I've used a typical psytrance or goa trance bass, which using the saw oscillator, the simple one. The pitch is on 0, glide is on 0. There is no edit on the oscillator because I wanted to use the original phase of the waveform. And the filter type is a low pass with this setting and the resonance, applying a bit of an envelope just to open the filter but close it very fast. There is no modulation on the bass because I wanted it to be very stable and hold the track. When you are choosing and playing your bass, it's very important to keep them very simple and make sure they are staying in their own in the lower frequency. You don't want too much movement. You don't want too much thing going on the bass. And here I also changed the envelope, the amp envelope, to a decay and release one. And you can see the setting here. I changed that to 43. For the FX, I applied some overdrive on the bass just to make it sound more fuller in the track. And you can hear it sound like this. Now for the actual pattern, I didn't record that. What I did is going to the step edit and I've entered, you can see all the bass note here. So this is a rolling bass, and let me exit just for a second so I can mute this and play this one. And this sounds like this. Right? So very simple. And what this type of pattern and sound gives to the track is give it this energy, an energy that is important for the dance floor. Now with these two parts, with the melody and the bass, I wanted also to have some acid bass line on top of that, just to give it some more interest and character, which I used on this track. And the settings of this bass are very similar to the previous bass. I'm also using here the saw oscillator, but for the filter, I'm using here the acid filter, which give it the familiar sound from the TB303 from Roland. And this part sounds like this. Now, when I come up with these melodies and bassline parts or even the drums, one thing I want to emphasize is that I think about each one of them separately, but I also think about them holistically and how they complement each other inside the track. Because I want to make sure that they are not competing and they are not interrupting each other during the track. So when you compose your track, you got to make sure that, yeah, each sound has its unique character, but also try to think about how they all working together to create this musical experience. So let's hear them all, how they work together. I will unmute this tree. You can hear how the acid bass line is complementing the melody. It's not coming on top of that. It's not interrupting. Okay, once I had this bass for the track, I started working on the drums. I'm not always starting from the melody and bass and then moving to the drums. Sometimes I'm starting from the drums and moving to the bass and melody. So I have no fixed workflow, and it's all depend on my inspiration. This time I was inspired to start with the melody, move to the bass, and then the drums. And for the drums, for the kick, I've used the short 909 wave. So it's a sample of the TR-909 kick, and it's a very short sample. And I choose that one because I wanted to work nicely with the main bass. I didn't want a kick that is very dominated. I wanted a kick that is short and snappy and can complement the rolling bass. Now, the original sample is not that strong, is not that snappy. So I had to put some effect on that. So let's hear it without the effect. You hear it's almost like disappearing in the mix. It has some good thumb and very good low frequency, but it's missing some transient that will help distinguish it in the mix. So to add the transient, I'd added the effect, which is the punch. And this help this kick to go along very nicely with the bass. So let's hear them together. If I take out the punch, you can hear that it's disappearing in the mix. The kick is now disappearing. But when I add it back, they are working very nicely together. And with the acid bassline, and also the melody. Okay, after I had the melody, the main bass, the acid bassline, and the kick, I moved on choosing some hi-hats and percussion. And for the hi-hat, I've used the default 909, also the TR909, the closed hi-hat over here. And instead of having an open hi-hat, which is usually go to this pad, I choose the Kabasa percussion, which originally it sound like this. But I gave it a higher pitch, so it will match the energy of the rolling bass and also the whole track. And I programmed it to be on all the 16 beats of the pattern. And also what I did is applying some groove on it. And this groove is basically affecting the velocity of each beat. So what happened here, if you think about it, when we say a beat, we refer to these guys, right? That they're falling like the kick, the 4-on-4 beat, right? So we have 1 point here, 1 point here, 1 point here, and 1 point here. Offbeat is everything that's coming in the middle, which is 3, 7, 11, and 15. And this sound like this. And what this does, this groove, it's accenting the middle between each kick and giving the track its energy. So if we listen to that together with the kick, you can hear that it goes, right? So the kick is falling on the first beat, but then this sound is bring us back in the middle, then fall back to the kick, and then fall up and down. And this is like creating this energy that goes up and down and create the track. And this goes very well with the rolling bass as well. So again, now when I explained it, I try to be cautious and think about how everything works together. But when I actually create the track, I don't really give that a thought. But by understanding this concept, by understanding how sounds works together, how parts work together, and how the whole track is built on these blocks, you can think about each part as a building blocks. How we create this musical experience that is pleasing and enjoyable for us to listen to. And I'm touching here on some basic of music theory, which I'm not really an expert on that. And I'm also learning and keep trying to educate myself on the subject, which I think is very important to know this stuff. So they are engraved in our mind. So the time comes when we're actually creating a track, it comes naturally. And we just apply all these rules and all this concept. Okay, let's hear what we have so far. So we said we have the melody, we have the bass, we have the TB303, the acid style bass, the kick, the close hi-hat, and the kabasa here. And these are the most strong element in the track. These are the elements that actually create a track. Everything else that coming on top of that is complementing those. And another element that I added to complement those is another percussion that is on this channel. And it's basically a conga. No effect, no special treatment, just a conga, simple sound. And if you hear it together with the melody, you can hear that it's coming exactly in the parts that complement the melody. It's not interrupting the melody. It's not coming on top of the melody. It's helping the melody. And together with everything. Now, to make it a bit more interesting, I wanted to add something towards the end of the fourth measure. And what I wanted to add there is some clap sound, which is on this channel. And for the clap, I used a sample of the 808 clap and put the master effect on top of that. So it gives it some movement, and when we put this clap at the end of the track, it's bring us back to the beginning of the track. So you can see from the sequencer, it's not showing up here, not here, not here, only at the end. I'm giving a hint of the clap just to bring us back to the beginning. And you can hear how it works together if I unmute it here. So what is happening here now, it's creating a loop, it's creating a cycle that brings us back. So it's becoming familiar to the ear, and it's consistent, and it's more interesting because we have something that's going on for the first measure, the second, the third, and on the fourth, we have something a bit different. And this creates some illusion of movement and something interesting. Once I had all this, I started to think about some other sounds that can complement the track. And from this point, the process is more or less random, and there is no specific workflow or guideline here. It's basically adding sound that you think are going well with what you have so far. So let's start with the sound here. It's a sync sine oscillator, and there is some movement here on the filter. There is the master effect on top of that. And for the effect, I've used here some distortion, just to give the sound more character. As if we don't have the distortion, it's not strong enough, it's not dominant. And this take care of the higher frequency in the track, because we pretty much covered the low and the mid-range frequency. We have a bit of very high frequency with the close hi-hat and the cabasa, but this one gives us some frequency that's not covered by the rest. And together, and you can hear how the movement of the filter bringing it in and out from the mix. Now, as I created this track and I had this so far, I felt like this sounds good, but it's a bit boring. It's a bit repeating itself. And I wanted to add some more elements just to make it a bit more interesting and give some variation to the track. And I added this over here. This is a unison saw wave. Once I programmed this sound, what I wanted to do is to copy it and have it also here. So I have two variations, and each one of them I painted to be in the opposite direction. So one is on the left side and one is on the right side. So when they are played together, there is some movement. And together with the master effect, which is the delay, it creates something very interesting. And they're both playing melodies that complement each other and working together to create a pattern. The effect I used on these sounds is a phaser, and I used exactly the same effect on both of them. So with all these sounds together, I had my main verse of the track, and I wanted to create a second verse that will break from this one and create some interest while still sounding familiar. And to do that, what I did is keeping the main bass and the kick and keeping the closed hi-hat and the cabasa, which together sound like this. And for the second verse, for the B verse, I wanted something that is a bit different. So it's not repeating what I already have in the first verse, which is the main verse actually. So in the second verse, I have added this very simple part. Which is a unison square wave. With some chorus effect on it and the master effect. And this is basically just one single note repeating itself. The reason I wanted to keep it simple because we don't want to take the focus from the main verse, the main melody. We want to create some break from the main, but we want to keep it simple. So you can think about this part as supporting actors in a film, right? We have the main actor, which is the melody, but all these other supporting the show. Now this sound by itself and with the kick, bass, and the closed hi-hat and the cabasa sounded okay. But I felt that like I needed something else here. I needed to put something on top of that. And I wanted to use another TB-303 kind of sound, but one that is more of an acid sound that sound like this. And you can see I'm applying here a distortion, and I'm using a very simple saw oscillator. But what really makes the sound of this particular part is the filter. So I'm using here again the acid TB-303 filter. And the trick here is getting a specific ratio between the cutoff and the resonance. So the resonance is very high and the cutoff is somewhere in the middle. And that way we can get this acid sound, right? And also the envelope is opened very little. So together it sounds like this. And I'm also applying some modulation on the filter, but very, very little, just to give it some movement. So it takes more time during the track to change. And it's complementing this track. And together. Now, what I did next is once I knew I had all the parts that I wanted to use, I had all the sounds that I wanted to be in the track, I create a different version of the pattern and copy it 4 times. So in the first one, it starts with the melody. And then if you can see in the original video, I'm just adding parts on top. So unmuting parts and introduce them slowly. Right? And for the second pattern, I'm moving to verse B. this one. And also using the crash symbol here, which if you look again at the video, I'm unmuting it before it's coming back. So it's only active when I'm moving to this pattern like this. And then I'm making sure to unmute it. So in the next cycle, it won't be heard. What I also have here is a rolling snare. And you can see that this is the snare drum from the TR-909. It's a sample of the TR-909 snare drum, which sound like this. But I saved the pattern with the volume all the way down and the track unmuted. And what I did is copy this to a new pattern, which in this pattern, I unmuted the snare drum and recorded the automation of the level. So the purpose of this pattern is to create a transition. And from this transition, we are moving to the fourth pattern, which is the main melody, but with some missing parts. And again, I have the crash here, crash symbol. So I gotta make sure when I'm recording that I'm unmuting. You can keep the crash going on, but I feel like that hearing the crash every 4 measure, it's a bit of annoying. That's why I like to mute it before it circle back. Now in the last step of this track, what I did is moving to the pattern set. And if you're not familiar with this section of the Electribe, what you basically can do here is take any pattern that you have, any saved pattern, and apply it to the different pads. So when you perform live, you can actually jump from one pattern to another. And the cool thing is that it won't jump immediately to this pattern. It will play the pattern first, and while you change it, it will finish playing the pattern and then going to the next pattern. So you can see, like in this example, if I'm playing the transition part and I'm changing to this blinking showing that it's going to finish first and then moving to the new one. So my whole performance of this track is based on changing the patterns and muting and unmuting parts, and in between tweaking the knobs, maybe the filter, maybe the volume, but that's all to it. So to recap, I'm starting with idea. It could be a melody, it could be a drum sound, but I'm starting with some idea. I don't always know how it's gonna develop, how it's gonna follow up, but I start with something. And then I start to build the other parts. And when I have the basic idea, I start to think about the structure of the track. And I'm starting to think about the different sections and the transition. And I make sure that I have everything that I want to cover in the track. And once I have this, I just copy the pattern a few times, assign it to a different pads with the pattern set, and then practice a few times the flow and structure and make decisions on how I actually want to perform the final one. So I hope this explanation was useful for you, and I hope that you learned something and picked some tips for my workflow. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.